we look at the question, what is mindfulness? I sort of see it like asking the question, what is the human mind? It's an immense question. If somebody were to ask you, what is the human mind? We could talk for many lifetimes about what it means to different people and its different interpretations. And there was even a teacher once, I forget who the teacher was, that said that they learned from their teacher. Their teacher used to ask them to point to their mind. And where do you point when someone asks you to point to your mind? And in a similar way, sometimes it can be difficult to know where to point to. Speaking in metaphor, when asked, what is mindfulness? Where is it that we point? But one way that I'll try to point to it today is by taking definitions from 3 teachers that I respect a lot and trying to break down the definitions to maybe give a compartmentalized understanding of what it means, what the basics of mindfulness means. Going along with the analogy of what is the mind, if somebody asks what is the mind, one interpretation of an answer might include the mind includes the human brain, and in the human brain there's the field of neuroscience, and we might break down the compartments of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the frontal lobe. These are different parts of the brain which might be interpreted as the mind, and this is one interpretation. So that is something to keep in mind, that when I speak about what is mindfulness, this is one interpretation from one vantage point, but it really is a massive question. Jon Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness as a means of paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. There's another definition by Shinzen Young, who wrote about it in his article, What is Mindfulness? It's a 73-page PDF, which I recommend reading if you haven't yet. And he also talks about a general definition of mindfulness, which is something along the lines of being in the present moment non-judgmentally. So if we look at Jon Kabat-Zinn and Shinzen Young's definition of mindfulness, there's a large emphasis on being in the present moment and non-judgmentally. The reason I think that this non-judgment is important enough to be included in these small definitions of mindfulness is because when we're trying to be present in the present moment, there is a very strong habit energy in the human mind, in the human experience, towards judgment. And that judgment can take us away from our present moment awareness. For example, if you are sitting in meditation and you are planning on, or you set the intention to be aware of your breath, this is just one thing that we can bring attention to in the present moment. It's a vehicle for experiencing what Jon Kabat-Zinn and Shinzen Young are saying when they say being present in the moment. The breath is something that happens always in this moment. But there's this strong habit energy of judgment that can come up. And what that might look like is if we're bringing attention to the breath, and that's our intention, and then we find ourselves thinking about a meeting that we have to attend later, or a speech we have to give, or who we have to drive where later. There's the potential for when we come to the realization that we have lost the breath in our awareness and have started to think about the future, that we may judge that. So if I break it down even farther, there's the intention to focus on the breath. Then there is the mind wandering away from the breath. And then potentially the judgment that arises because the mind has wandered. In my practice, what was one of the first fundamental shifts in order to help me have an easier time meditating was looking at that third part. So there's sitting down to focus on the breath. Mind wandering is the second part. Third part being judging the mind for wandering. It may be helpful to start there with the judging. Meaning, see if you can try as an experiment that when you sit down, if you set an intention of your meditation practice, then the mind wanders. Then there's this judgment. See if you can work with this judgment. Look at it. Invite the judgment into the present moment awareness. That was another transition or shift for me when I realized that I can invite even the judgment into the present moment awareness. It's happening in your experience. So this same awareness that we bring to the breath, we can bring to the judgment itself and start to understand, what is this judgment? When does it arise? What happens in my body? What happens in my mind when I judge myself like this? The other part of the definition from Jon Kabat-Zinn and Shinzen Young is being in the present moment. And that is, it's the simplest question in the world to answer and the hardest question in the world to answer. It's as simple. If we don't overthink it, overanalyze it, it's as simple as being in the present moment. Seeing through your eyes. Tasting with your tongue. Touching with your fingers. Feeling gravity holding you to the earth. Hearing the birds chirp. Having a glass of water. It's as simple as just being with your experience as it's happening. It's like if you look at a baby. If the baby sees a shiny object and they crawl over to the shiny object, that's all they're experiencing. They might feel their knees and their hands touching the carpet that they're crawling on, and then they might come closer to this experience, and they might come closer to this object, and they might put it in their mouth, and they might feel their gums touching this object, and it's just pure sensation and experience and awareness. Mindfulness can be looked at from one vantage point as carrying this pure awareness into adulthood. Just when you're sitting and eating breakfast, just be sitting and eating breakfast. It could really be defined as simply as that. Now, I also say that it's a hard question to answer because there are philosophers, spiritual teachers, scholars who have written endless research articles on it. And I just mentioned Shinzen Young, who has taught meditation and mindfulness for over 50 years. He wrote a 73-page PDF on the question, what is mindfulness? So it can also be vastly expansive if we look at it from that vantage point. Sometimes I find that it's helpful for me, especially when I'm trying to practice, to boil it down to this simple answer of just being with what is happening as it's happening. And that's it. And not looking much deeper into it. I listened to it's a YouTube video of an old lecture by Alan Watts, and he talked about a Zen teaching. And I don't remember it exactly, but I'll try to give my best representation of it. There was a student in a Zen monastery who walked up to the Zen master, and the Zen master was moving pallets of rice from bags of rice from a pallet to a truck or to a vehicle. And the student asked, "Master, what is the practice of Zen?" And to make things simple in this example, he's asking, "What is mindfulness? Master, what is mindfulness?" And without batting an eye, without thinking about it, the master said, "Moving bags of rice from a pallet to a vehicle." There's another story of a Zen student who was he was being taught by a Zen master, and the master said, "When you're eating, just eat. When you're walking, just walk. When you are laughing, just laugh." And one day the student saw the Zen master sitting in the cafeteria, and he was eating his lunch, but he was also reading. And the student went up to the teacher and said, "Teacher, I thought you said when you're eating, just eat." And the teacher smiled and said, "Yes, when you're eating, just eat." And the student said, "Well, what about you right now?" And the teacher said, "When you're eating and reading, just eat and read." It's really could be as simple as whatever you're doing, just doing it. Jon Kabat-Zinn wrote a book called "Wherever You Go, There You Are." It means just being here with what's happening as it's happening. And maybe keeping it that simple. Another teacher that I respect greatly is Thich Nhat Hanh. And his definition that I found online of mindfulness is the practice of being fully present and alive, body and mind united. Mindfulness is the energy that helps us to know what is going on in the present moment. So again, pointing towards this, being in the present moment. But Thich Nhat Hanh has a larger emphasis on this connection between body and mind. He'll often guide meditations where he will talk about bringing the mind back home to the body. And what he means by that, in my interpretation, is sometimes we can fall into this cerebral experience where we're just thinking. And we get caught in the mind, up in this cerebral experience. But his meditation, his guided meditations will help us recognize that the mind, and when I say the mind, I mean this cerebral thought experience, wandering mind, is happening in the body. So he will direct us to bring awareness to this whole body and recognizing the mind as something that's in this body. And so to me that helps us connect with this larger experience of awareness, which can include the thinking mind. Just as before I was speaking about including the judging in the practice of awareness. It's like this thinking mind, this wandering mind, which includes judgment at times, can also be included in the experience of awareness. So without overcomplicating things, I guess I'll just say, just as Jon Kabat-Zinn and Thich Nhat Hanh and Shinzen Young have already said, if you really just boil it down to the basics of mindfulness, of what it is, it's just being here in this moment with whatever is happening while it's happening.